For this special event with Kent Walker, the President of Global Affairs at Google. My name is Catherine Daniel and I'm the current Director of the ANU School of Cybernetics here in the College of Engineering, Computing and Cybernetics, and I'll be your facilitator for today's event. To begin today's proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate that we are on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I would like to pay my respect to elders past and present. These are lands that are sacred, they have never been ceded, and we acknowledge that the technologies and sustainable governance systems have been created here for millennia, and that this community knowledge remains enormously important to the futures that we are going to be building here together. So our proceedings here today have been the result of cross-campus ANU collaboration with the Google team, and I would like to acknowledge the ANU School of Regulation and Global Governance, the ANU Tech Policy Design Centre, the ANU College of Law, and the team at the ANU School of Cybernetics, who have been partnering together to bring this event to you. So the format for today's event is that we will have a presentation from Kent, followed by a fireside chat with responses and questions from three distinguished ANU panellists who work across AI systems, policy, technology, regulation, design and implementation. And then we will have general discussion and Q&A with the audience. So with those brief words of introduction, I'm delighted to welcome Kent Walker to the ANU for his address. Kent is the President of Global Affairs at Google and Alphabet, where he oversees the teams responsible for legal matters, government affairs and content policy. For over 30 years, Kent has focused on the intersection of technology, law and policy. Since joining Google in 2006, he has led the company's advocacy on competition, content, copyright and privacy. He has worked with government leaders around the world and served as the first chair of the Global Internet Forum to Combat Terrorism. After overseeing the creation of Google's AI principles in 2018, he became the chair of the company's AI Responsibility Council. Ken graduated with honours from Harvard College and Stanford Law School. He served as an assistant US attorney in San Francisco and Washington, DC, starting one of the first technology crime units in the country and later advising the US Attorney General on technology policy issues. He went on to hold executive positions at Netscape, AOL and eBay as they navigated the rise of web, online communities and e-commerce. Ken serves on TechNet's executive committee and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you so much, Ken, for joining us, and we welcome you here for your address.
Thanks very much. Whoa, okay, sorry about that. I'm going to try that about this level. You all tell me, does that sound good? All right, let me just talk from here if that's okay. First off, thanks to all of you for coming today. We couldn't imagine a better place to have a conversation about the overlap of cutting edge technology and cutting edge policy than ANU and particularly the cybernetics program. So really looking forward to the conversation today. We are in the middle of a remarkable era. So I thought I'd spend a few words at the beginning talking about the trends we're seeing in AI, where we've come recently and where we're going. Shifting then to talk about Australia's role in that evolution and what you all bring to the table and the potential we see in Australia for further growth. Then stepping back a little bit and talking about the international context. We're seeing lots of different frameworks and ideas, private sector, private-public partnerships, et cetera. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, what do we do about this? How does a country like Australia prepare itself for this new AI era, this new digital era? What are the hallmarks of great public policy? We're learning as we're going here. And we have some experiences, we've made some mistakes, and can we share that in a way that helps everybody do it better? So with that, let me kick off. Most of you have been using AI, whether you knew it or not, for the last 12, 14 years. If you've used Google Search or Maps or Translate or even Gmail and didn't get spam, that was AI. But until AI stepped out from behind the curtain in the form of some of the chatbots that we're seeing now, it didn't really feel as tangible. It felt just like another improvement to algorithms. But now what we're seeing is remarkable. I mean, it's important to remember that AI is far from just a chatbot. It is a revolution in the way we do science. It is a breakthrough in making breakthroughs. So the first story I go to is one having to do with Alpha, a program created by our DeepMind team in London called AlphaFold. Many of you may be familiar with it. At a high level, humanity had, 25 years ago, sequenced the human DNA. But just knowing the sequence of letters didn't tell you that much in practice about how to do personalized medicine or predict the next drug. What the AlphaFold team was able to do was understand how those letters translated into the actual shapes of proteins, how the proteins folded, the way the biologists talked about it. And now suddenly you can understand how those proteins interact with other proteins. So if a COVID virus has this kind of spike, you need this kind of vaccine. If it has this kind of spike, you need a different kind of vaccine. Well, the problem was there were 250 million proteins known to science. And each one of them, until a couple of years ago, took a biology PhD student a full thesis, 3-4 years, to fold one protein. The AlphaFold team did all 250 million of them in 3 weeks, and then open sourced it. In other words, that's like taking every man, woman, and child in Australia, teaching them to be a biology PhD student, and then having them do nothing but fold proteins for 10 years. So we're seeing generational changes in how we are able to do biology, material science, starting to make dramatic advances in quantum, new areas like nuclear fusion. So this is a remarkable and exciting time. And we are trying to figure out now what are the frameworks that go along with that. Now, Australia is extraordinarily well equipped to be part of that work. You have leading universities, you have extraordinary tech talent, STEM education, a widely skilled, I'm sorry, the microphone keeps going in and out, excuse me, a skilled workforce, and groups like CSIRO. We've partnered with CSIRO with a $1 billion Tech Futures Initiative, where we are working with scientists and academics and entrepreneurs on projects ranging from helping with pollution and overfishing in the Great Barrier Reef to researchers in Australia using the AlphaFold technologies we've talked about to make advances in Parkinson's and understand how we can put these scientific breakthroughs to practical application. So there's an awful lot of reason for optimism and for Australia's contribution to what this next generation of applications will look like. Now, stepping back, Australia is obviously not acting on its own. We have an international framework, series of international frameworks now. The G7 got together with the Hiroshima process, setting out principles for AI governance. The OECD has weighed in. The United Nations has passed not one, but 2 separate, I believe, unanimous resolutions about key principles for AI regulation. And that's just at the governmental level. That the private sector and private partnerships with civil society have resulted in lots of different initiatives with regard to long-term model safety for the concerns about AGI, artificial general intelligence. We've created the Frontier Model Forum. In response to concerns about deepfakes and election fraud, we entered into the Tech Accord in Munich at the Munich Security Conference with roughly 20 leading tech companies coming together to agree on standards for how to detect and identify information that might be deceptive in elections. We've worked together in a group led by Adobe, the Content Provenance and Authenticity Coalition, the C2PA, that is coming up with standards for watermarking, which is when you put a signal into your own created AI material, and provenance, which is when you are trying to identify whether something from someone else is AI generated, which turned out to be a much harder problem. The ML Commons Group, which is, again, industry and private and civil society, working on standards for evaluation and benchmarking. What does good look like when you're evaluating a new model? These are really hard questions, and we're all learning together more or less from scratch. What are the tolerances for how good a model has to be before you release it? These are real world questions we confront every day when we have something like our Waymo driverless car. How much better than human level do driverless cars, self-driving cars need to be before you put them on the streets? The first order answer is, well, just anything better than human level would save lives, so you should rush that out. But the social context of those sorts of things maybe suggests you need to be quite a bit better because there'll be so much disproportionate attention to one life that's lost because of a driverless car compared to many lives that are lost in normal traffic accidents. And you don't want to have people not trust self-driving cars. So these kinds of complex questions are ones that we're constantly working through. So now the question then comes for government and policy. How does Australia grab the digital initiative here? You're already seeing regional leaders like Japan and Singapore come up with frameworks for promoting innovation in AI in different ways. There's a temptation or the risk of making mistakes. It's easy to fight the last battle, to say because we think of AI as chatbots, maybe we think of the way to regulate it as a social media problem. And perhaps we underregulated social media, so we should rush to regulate now. I think that would be a mistake for the reasons we've talked about, that the potential here is really one of science. And it's difficult to regulate thoughtfully, not impossible, but I think it takes some time to understand the implications. There was a book written in the 1980s by David Collingridge called The Social Control of Technology. And many of you may know what's been called Collingridge's dilemma. It's possible to regulate technology too late when it's locked in, but it's also possible to regulate it too early before you really know what the issues are. The famous example is when the first cars came to the UK in the 1860s, the first laws were limits that they couldn't go more than 2 miles an hour in the city or more than 4 miles an hour in the country, and had to be preceded by a guy carrying a red flag to warn the horses. So I think those laws lasted about a year or two before they said, maybe not exactly fit for purpose. So how do we strike the right balance? What are the principles we should use? I would suggest there are three that we are seeing around the world working well. And I summarize them as being balanced, being aligned, and being targeted. So let me unpack that for a second. What does balanced mean? For starters, I think you have to make sure that you're taking into account both the positives, the opportunity, the abundance, the promise, as well as the negatives. The human mind tends to go to the risk side of the equation. At Google, we talk about being both bold and responsible. Make sure we have that balance. The standard cannot be perfection. The standard should be, how do we do something now? And can we do it significantly better? It's easy to forget how flawed human decision-making is, how non-transparent human decision-making is. If I'm a bank and I don't give you a loan, is it because you didn't have the right loan-to-value ratio? Or is it because I didn't like your accent or the way you dressed? We don't really have a way of extrapolating and understanding that AI and algorithmic decision-making may actually make things more transparent than they are now, may improve the quality of decision-making. I was on the board of a small company working on coronary artery disease, largest killer of people in the world. Tool that was validated by the NHS in the UK, the US health authorities, Japanese health authorities. Excuse me. We went to the hospitals and they said, great tool, love it, cheaper, better, faster, going to save a lot of lives. But it's a new tool. So we want to have a human in the loop just to make sure you're not making a mistake. These are serious, high consequence decisions. The experience was if you put a human in the loop, the results got worse. The more experienced the human, the worse the results. Because the human said, I've seen this 100 times. The system had seen it 1,000,000 times. So most times when the human was overruling the decision, he was overruling in the wrong direction. That's not to say that there's not a role for human oversight, systematic oversight in this, but there's a measure of humility on all sides of the equation to understand that our current systems have opportunities for improvement, and AI can in many ways facilitate that. All right, so that's the balance side of the equation. We're taking into account the opportunities and the benefits, understand there are lots of different factors that we need to take into account, how to make sure that models are not discriminatory, that not just data sets are balanced, but algorithms are thoughtful. We at Google have had our share of experiences doing this right and doing this wrong. Happy to talk more about how some of the mistakes we've made as we go along. But also issues like different impacts on different sectors of society, not just underrepresented populations, but questions like copyright, the interests of publishers versus the interests of scientists who want to use the knowledge embedded in human knowledge to advance science. How do we square that? We think there are paths through, but it's pretty clearly not on the one side, allowing anybody who's ever created content to block the operation models, or on the other, saying that publishers have no right to reimbursement. So we're looking for middle grounds there. That was balance. And I'll try and be a little faster on the other two. Alignment goes to the notion of trying to make sure that we are trying to figure out how best to integrate the frameworks that any one country comes up with the global frameworks that are emerging. We already do this in other sectors. ISO, the International Standards Organization, is essentially a transnational approach to setting standards for technologies we all use. Some of the work that we're talking about with ML Commons, for example, what does good look like? There's an awful lot of opportunity to do that. And so we have encouraged the UN, the OECD, the G7 to work in a holistic way to bring in not just those countries, but also the global South, who have great optimism about the potential for AI and some concern that they may be left out if the development is done just by countries that have the resources to do it. Finally, regulation needs to be targeted. What does that mean? There was early on in the last few years a temptation to kind of rush in with one-size-fits-all answers. We need a Department of AI. We need an AI law. That's not really the way good technology legislation has ever really worked. We have hundreds of years of experience in regulating the underlying issues. And the AI issues in banking are going to be very different than the AI issues in healthcare. We need every agency to be an AI agency, taking advantage of the banking regulators' 100 years of experience in banking and the healthcare regulators' 100 years of experience in healthcare, and turbocharging that with an awareness of the unique issues of AI. Now, there may well be a need for a hub and spoke approach where you have a center of technical excellence in the United States, a group like the National Institute of Standards and Technologies that can then support the work of individual agencies. But trying to rule everything from the center doesn't make any more sense than having one law to govern all use of engines or one department to govern all use of electricity. So as we go through in this targeted, somewhat more incremental approach, rules that we have found useful are things like focus on outputs, not inputs. Don't try to micromanage the science any more than you would micromanage algebra. Manage the real world outputs that are having impacts on people's lives. Those kinds of approaches really will make sure that as the technology advances so quickly, the policy can advance along with it and understand the real world implications of what's happening. So if we do those things, then we're very optimistic that collectively the technologists and the politicians can work together in a way that really dramatically advances opportunity and abundance for everybody. But there's obviously a lot of open questions here and a lot of work to be done. So we were encouraging people to start to get their hands dirty, start to play with these models, understand for themselves what they can do, what they can't do, in not just on the chatbot side, but in the lab. One of the most amazing papers I saw recently was the notion that AI, the creation of an AI scientist who looked at I use the phrase lightly, the model identified a topic, was given a topic, came up with some open questions, distilled some hypotheses, looked at the most promising hypothesis, worked through an agentic behavior using agency and other tools, tested the hypothesis, wrote a paper about the process of finding the hypothesis, the testing, the falsifiability, et cetera, and the conclusions, and published the paper. To me, this is a distillation of the promise of AI being able to supercharge the work that all of science is doing, but also the power and the importance of making sure we have the right policy frameworks to get it right. So this is where all of you come in and where the conversation today, I think, will take us. So with that, let me invite everybody else up to the stage. Thank you very much.